Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners, getting ready to kick off week 6 with a little tight end action today. Hopefully everybody is doing well out there. Hopefully your week 5 matchups went in your favor, and we're getting a little momentum now moving forward towards week 6. We had some down performances last week from tight ends. We had some huge performances looking at you, Travis Kelce, with 4 touchdowns. And now we need to make a decision on who we are going to be using moving forward, especially since the bye weeks are now here and what that means for our lineups. But let's go ahead and jump right into the action. Thursday night football this week could possibly be worse than last week. I know that would be tough. That'd be tough for us, but it could be. Washington's going to be at Chicago this week. Right now, Logan Thomas for me is a sit. Already dealing with a calf injury, limited action on Monday, short week this week, and it's a tough matchup. The Bears allow the 8th fewest fantasy points to tight end right now, and that's just worrisome for me. Right now, on Thursday night, I don't think there's any reason to risk it with Logan Thomas, knowing that he's limited, knowing that he's got the calf injury, knowing that he's got a tough matchup. I'll just look for maybe something with a little bit more upside later in the week. Cole Kmet is an afterthought in this offense right now, and really that's kind of the same thing for everyone, so we'll be avoiding him for another week. San Francisco at Atlanta, and George Kittle's going to be making it back to a start for me this week. Great matchup going up against Atlanta as they allow the 4th most fantasy points to tight end on the season. And really in this offense, no one has established themselves as the guy since Jimmy Garoppolo has come back. And I think this is the perfect matchup for George Kittle to maybe step up and have that type of a game where him and Jimmy G get back on the same page, and then we can rely on him moving forward. For Kyle Pitts, San Francisco may have the best defense in the league, and Kyle Pitts just has not performed this year. He's banged up right now. For me, I am completely out on Kyle Pitts this week. If for some reason he has a crazy game out of nowhere, oh well, who cares? We're going to leave him on the bench, and we're just going to hope that nothing happens. New England at Cleveland. Hunter Henry sighting last week for the first time this season, but it was against the crap Lions defense, so I'm not going to read too much into it. Browns allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points to tight ends right now. Going to be a sit for both of us over here on New England. For Cleveland, we're going back to David Njoku. Now, New England did hold TJ Hockenson to barely anything last week, but I blame that more on the offense and Jared Goff than I do on TJ Hawkinson's performance. But David Njoku, if you throw out week 1 stats where he had a very poor week, if you throw out those stats, he's 5th in targets and 2nd in yards among tight ends right now. This guy has become a weekly tight end start, and if you own him, you probably grabbed him off waivers, and he may be one of the best pickups of the season. New York Jets and Green Bay, they bring a couple of close sits for me. Both Conklin and Tonyan scoring a 14. Now, for me, again, being very close, it could lean either way with both of these guys. For Tyler Conklin, Green Bay allows the 6th fewest fantasy points to tight end right now, and really Wilson's kind of spreading the ball around. No one's getting a ton of looks throughout the game. Everyone's getting about the same amount, and they're going to multiple guys throughout the game. Breece Hall's starting to pick up in the passing game a little bit. We got to keep that in mind. And for Robert Tonyan, I mean, the dude is touchdown dependent right now. The Jets have not allowed a touchdown to a tight end yet this season. I got to be out on him once again. The ceiling is not high enough for me. Now, one thing I will preface with Robert Tonyan this week, the matchups on the outside against the New York Jets could be a little bit tougher, so it could lead to a few more targets. But I'm thinking we're talking 50, maybe 60 yards. And again, he would have to score a touchdown to be a legit start for you. So I feel like there's just better options with a little bit more upside. Jacksonville, Indianapolis, and you know how I feel about Evan Ingram. I mean, he has a great week when we sit him, and he has a bad week when we start him. And he had a great week a couple of weeks ago, and I told everybody that he disappears after that happens. Well, he had a pretty good week last week, but the numbers show that we got to try and put Evan Ingram in there, knowing that Indianapolis allows the 6th most fantasy points to tight ends. That number 5 in the matchup rating pushes him over to a start, and we will go with him this week. Now, if you're asking me, Kyle, would you start him over a Logan Thomas? Yes. Would you start him over a Tyler Conklin or a Bobby Tunyon? Probably both of those guys. Yes. Now, Conklin might end up being a little bit safer. Ingram is going to have a higher upside for me, though. So we are going to put him over some of these sits that we have listed right now, even if they are close. For the Indianapolis Colts, I mean, really, it's all touchdown dependency right now for all of these guys. Jacksonville allows the third fewest fantasy points to tight ends. These tight ends have been TD dependent, and I just don't know if they're going to be able to score this week with the tight ends against Jacksonville. Minnesota at Miami, and Irv Smith Jr. is going to find himself as a start again this week. The Miami defense really has not been able to stop anybody. It doesn't matter the position. They just haven't been able to stop anybody. They allow the 8th most fantasy points to tight ends right now. Irv Smith Jr. is a risky start, but the matchup potential is there for him. And again, we're trying to exploit those high upside matchups, like an Irv Smith Jr. That is a guy with a high upside matchup. Evan Ingram is one as well. So again, those are where we have somebody that might be a little bit more of a safer start at tight end, that's just a tougher matchup. Let's try to go to somebody with a higher upside with them this week. Now for Mike Gesicki, this one could change later in the week. So this is it. This is very important for everybody listening right now, because I don't know how many times Jake and I can say this. You can't watch the start and sit videos on Tuesday and Wednesday and then bail on the rest of the week. We update all this information as the week goes on. Like last week with Gabe Davis, we ended up switching him to a start, and a guy that in the rankings video I said if McKenzie's out, we're 100% going to play. Then we found out Knox was going to be out. Then we were like, yes, if you own him, get him in your lineup, and he had a huge week, and I've already seen it from a couple of people. You told me to sit him in the start sit video, so I didn't play him. Yeah, because things change throughout the week, and that is exactly what could happen with Mike Gesicki. Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill are both banged up. If for some reason one or maybe both of them were to miss for any reason whatsoever, we have to reevaluate Mike Gesicki, knowing that his potential matchup being a 4 against Minnesota could push him into being a start. So make sure you check back in the rankings video to see if he is a guy that we end up moving up the boards. Cincinnati at New Orleans, and for right now, Hayden Hurst is going to be a start. New Orleans allows the 5th fewest fantasy points to tight end, and Higgins right now is really a big question mark for me. He couldn't even make it. He was questionable all last week, ended up dressing, couldn't even make it out of the first quarter. He was so banged up, that ankle really bothering him. So because of that, if he ends up missing this week, Hayden Hurst is definitely a guy that even with the tougher matchup could be a safe start, knowing that the targets will be there even if the upside is not. Taysom Hill will be a start. Now, if you start Taysom Hill in your tight end position, you have to accept full responsibility of it, because there's no telling when or where this guy is going to have a good game. He's not a traditional player. He's not a guy that lines up at one position and receives a bunch of volume. It just doesn't happen, especially considering he's a tight end. So you have to keep in mind that he is a gadget player. For whoever was in the comments this week trying to tell me he's not a gadget player, it's been a while since I've laughed that hard. He absolutely is a gadget player. The dude plays quarterback, running back, and tight end. Absolutely, that's what he is. Gadget players are based on gadget plays, and if those don't work, they're not startable. So if you're going to put Taysom Hill in your lineup, yes, the upside is there, but the floor for him is basically 0. Baltimore at the New York Giants. And New York does allow the 10th fewest fantasy points to tight end, but it doesn't matter. It's Mark Andrews. We don't sit Mark Andrews regardless of how tough the matchup is. On the New York Giants side, Daniel Bellinger, he's a guy over the last couple of weeks I've told you to keep an eye on. That with as many injuries that they've had at the wide receiver position, he's a guy that could end up establishing some value at some point in time. He scored last week on a running play. The volume still isn't there. Even with all the wide receivers having issues, the volume still isn't there in terms of targets for Daniel Bellinger. Keep an eye on it as usual. We're not picking him up yet. Maybe at some point he starts to excel. That's when it's time to grab him. Tampa Bay at Pittsburgh. All the wide receivers are making their way back to a healthy status now for Tampa Bay, which means Brayton, Auden, neither of those guys are really worth a fantasy start as of right now. If we see that any more people get banged up, then maybe we go to one of them. But as of right now, not really worth it. Now, the big question mark this week in this matchup is going to be Pat Freiermuth. This is a great matchup. Tampa Bay allows the 7th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. But last week, Pat Freiermuth left the game with a concussion. It is his 3rd concussion in the last 12 months. That is not good at all. Will he be cleared this week? Part of me says I doubt it. For 3 concussions in 12 months, I highly doubt they try to run him back out there that early. If they do, he would be a start for me, as you see here. Obviously, if he misses, though, we would have to find another option, and I do think there are some good options that you could grab off the waivers this week. Carolina at the LA Rams. The Rams currently allow the fewest fantasy points to tight end. So we're not going to be starting Ian Thomas and Tommy Tremble. And if you were thinking about it, I would just pack it in for the year and be done, because clearly your team isn't going to make it. Tyler Higbee, though, he is such a safe start at tight end right now. Yeah, maybe the ceiling hasn't really been very high, but he's tied with Mark Andrews in targets. He's getting tons of targets and tons of looks, which leads him this week to being my prize picks prop of the week. And I'm going to take the over with Tyler Higbee of 50.5 yards. Carolina a little bit tougher on the outside against wide receivers. This is a middle of the road matchup for Higbee at tight end. We know he's getting the 2nd most targets right now. We're probably going to continue to see that this week. The opportunity for him to hit 50 yards is absolutely going to be there with how many targets he gets. Arizona at Seattle is going to bring my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. Make sure if you do head over to manscaped.com, you use code word headliners. You're going to get 20% off your entire order and free shipping. Get yourself, the loved one in your life, a few stocking stuffers, maybe a nice Christmas present. Manscaped.com, code word headliners. For Arizona, Seattle allows the most fantasy points per game. And for Seattle, Arizona allows the 2nd most fantasy points per game. This could be a fun one. Zach Ertz could be in for a huge week this week with Seattle not being able to cover the tight ends very well. Obviously, one really big performance from TJ Hawkinson kind of offsets that a little bit, but still it doesn't take away from the fact that they haven't been very good this year. Arizona allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to tight end, which means 3 touchdowns along with it. Will Dissly, the touchdown tight end master, is actually going to be a start for me this week, given the matchup that he has. But listen right now, if you are starting Dissly this week, you're banking on a touchdown. If he doesn't get the touchdown, you're going to hate your decision. The upside and the potential is there. The floor, though, let's just be honest here. If you step on it, it could cave in at any second. Buffalo at KC. Travis Kelce coming off a record-setting 4-touchdown game and 24 yards? 24 yards and 4 touchdowns for Travis Kelce. So for Travis Kelce, obviously we're going to be starting him. For Dawson Knox, though, it is a good matchup for Knox, but we don't even know if he can play yet this week. So you're going to have to check back later in the week. If he can play, his injury score might go up a little bit depending on what we're looking at, which could end up making him as a start. But for right now, he's going to be a sit. Dallas at Philadelphia, and one of my preseason loves, Dalton Schultz, just isn't the love of Cooper Rush. Cooper Rush just doesn't feel himself some Dalton Schultz the way Dak Prescott does. So for right now, knowing that Schultz is still banged up, I mean, we saw it last week, he had to come off the field a couple of times, was still hobbling on that knee. Going to need to keep an eye on that. With Dak Prescott being out still, I would be no on Dalton Schultz. When Dak Prescott comes back, though, that is when we reevaluate whether or not Dalton Schultz will be a start for us. For Dallas Goedert, for as many ups and downs as the wide receivers have in Philadelphia, Goddard continues to be consistent. 335 receiving yards, 3rd among tight ends right now. Not a great matchup against Dallas, but still, we're not going to be sitting a tight end that's doing as well as Goddard is. Denver at the Los Angeles Chargers. We're not going to be starting any tight ends for Denver as of right now, especially with the way the offense is performing. But Gerald Everett will be a start for us again on Monday Night Football. We'll continue to monitor Keenan Allen and whether or not him coming back affects Gerald Everett. And yes, he had an awful game last week, and it probably cost some of you, and that stinks. But you're not going to get great weeks every single week unless you're Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews. After that, it really is just about determining that upside. Gerald Everett continues to be the number 2 option in this offense with no Keenan Allen. Austin Eckler getting a little bit more volume now. Things are starting to look better for him, and that's what's hurting Gerald Everett a little bit more. But in this matchup against Denver, hopefully Denver plays well, and if they do, Los Angeles will be throwing the ball a little bit more. But ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. We've got 4 teams on buys this week. So if you're looking for any type of a sleeper option or somebody to stream this week, we've got a few options for you in this video. Hit the like button for me. Make sure you smack that before you get out of here. Subscribe if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners, would be much appreciated. And leave a comment down below for which tight end you are most excited to watch this weekend. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get out of here though. All of you stay safe, stay healthy. Peace out. I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.